Marcus Chun stood perfectly still in the golden hallway of the Volanthi Imperial Palace, his hands clasped behind his back and his eyes fixed on the far wall, like a good servant should keep them. He was not a servant. Not really. But that was what they had made him 3 years ago. He had been Commander Chun of the Earth Defense Fleet, a man who had led soldiers into battle and brought them home alive, a man who had earned medals and respect and the quiet pride of his family back in the small village, where his grandmother still lived now. He stood in silence outside a garden door, waiting for nothing, serving no real purpose except to remind everyone who passed that humanity knew its place among the stars. Volanthi had welcomed humans into the galactic concord with soft words and softer smiles. And Marcus had learned quickly that their kindness was the kind a person shows to a dog that has learned an amusing trick. They were beautiful. The Volanthi, tall and slender with skin like polished silver and eyes that glowed with inner light. And they moved through their crystal halls like music, given physical form. They had ruled their empire for 12,000 years. And they never let anyone forget it. Marcus did not hate them. Hatred required too much energy, and he had learned to save his strength. But he did not love them either. He simply endured. The twin suns of Aetherus Prime were setting beyond the crystal dome above him, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, and the light fell through the garden windows in long warm bars that reminded him of summer evenings on Earth. He missed Earth with an ache that never quite went away, missed the smell of rain on concrete, and the sound of his grandmother humming in her kitchen, and the way the stars looked from his childhood bedroom window here. The stars were different, arranged in patterns he did not recognize. And sometimes at night he felt like a man who had wandered into someone else's dream. The garden door was slightly open, and through it he could hear the soft sounds of water falling and leaves rustling in an artificial breeze. And then he heard something else. Someone was humming. The melody drifted through the door like smoke, soft and sad and achingly familiar. And Marcus felt his heart stop in his chest. He knew that song. He knew it the way he knew his own heartbeat, the way he knew the smell of his grandmother's cooking and the feel of her wrinkled hand on his forehead. When he was sick as a child, it was the lullaby she had sung to him every night, the one she said her grandmother had taught her, the one that was older than anyone could remember, without thinking, without meaning to. Marcus began to hum along. The melody wrapped around him like a warm blanket, and he closed his eyes and let it carry him home, back to a small bedroom in a small village, on a small blue planet that seemed so impossibly far away now. And then he began to sing the words, soft and low, in the old language his grandmother had taught him. Words that he did not fully understand, but that felt right in his mouth, like they belonged there. The humming from the garden stopped. Marcus opened his eyes and found Princess Alindra Velshan standing in the doorway, her silver skin gone pale and her glowing eyes wide with something he had never seen on a Volanthi face before. She was the third in line to the crystal throne, one of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. And she was looking at him like he had just risen from the dead. "Where did you learn that?" she whispered, and her voice was shaking. Marcus did not know what to say. His mind was racing, and his heart was pounding, and he could not understand why she looked so terrified. "My grandmother taught me," he said, and his own voice sounded strange to him. "She learned it from her grandmother, and she learned it from hers. It is just an old song from my village." The princess took a step toward him, and then another, and he could see that her hands were trembling. "That song does not exist," she said. "It was lost 10,000 years ago when the first temple burned. It was never written down, never recorded. Only the royal bloodline knew the words, and we have forgotten most of them." She was standing close to him now, close enough that he could see the tiny lights swimming in her silver eyes like stars in a pale sky. "Nobody knows this song," she whispered. Nobody in the entire galaxy knows this song except me and my mother and my grandmother before her. Marcus shook his head slowly, confusion and wonder mixing in his chest like two rivers meeting. My grandmother knows it, he said. She sang it to me every night when I was a child. She said it was the oldest song in the world. The princess stared at him for a long moment, and he watched something change in her face. Watched fear give way to something else, something that looked almost like hope. What is your name? She asked. Marcus Chun, Your Highness. Marcus Chun, she repeated. And the way she said it made it sound like a question she was asking the universe itself. You are human? Yes. Your Highness. She reached out and touched his face with fingers that were cool and smooth as glass. And he held perfectly still as she traced the line of his jaw and the curve of his ear, as if she was looking for something hidden beneath his skin. How is this possible? She murmured, and he did not think she was talking to him anymore. How can a human know the lament of the last mother? Marcus did not have an answer for her. He did not know why his grandmother's lullaby was the same as an ancient Volanti hymn. Did not know why a song from a small village on Earth could shake a princess to her core, but standing there in the fading light of alien suns, looking into eyes that held 10,000 years of secrets, he felt something stir in his chest, something that told him his life was about to change forever. Princess lowered her hand and stepped back. And when she spoke again, her voice was steady, but her eyes were still wild. Come with me, she said. Tell no one what happened here. Speak to no one about the song. Can you do that? Marcus nodded slowly. Good, she said. And she turned and walked back into the garden, and he followed her without hesitation, leaving his post for the first time in 3 years behind. Then the twin suns slipped below the horizon, and the crystal halls fell into shadow. And somewhere in the darkness, a secret that had slept for 10,000 years began to wake. In the weeks that followed, Marcus and the princess met in secret. Always in different places, always at different times. Always watching for signs that they had been discovered. They gathered evidence like thieves gathering gold, piece by piece and fragment by fragment, building a picture of the past that grew more disturbing with each new discovery. The Forbiddens archive held centuries of secrets, but the most damning ones were hidden in plain sight, buried in trade agreements and diplomatic records and military reports that no one had bothered to read in generations. Marcus was trained to see patterns. It was what had made him a good commander. And the patterns he found in those records made his blood run cold. 40 years ago, a brilliant human scientist named Dr. Sarah Webb had been working on faster-than-light communication, a breakthrough that would have given humanity the ability to reach across the stars instantly. She died in a shuttle accident that was ruled pilot error 20 years ago. A human colony ship carrying 10,000 settlers to a new world suffered a catastrophic engine failure and vanished without a trace. The investigation found no cause, and the case was closed. 10 years ago, a human diplomat named James Okonkwo discovered evidence of Volanti interference in Earth's early space program and requested a formal inquiry. He fell ill with a mysterious disease and died within weeks. And all his research disappeared. One incident could be coincidence, two could be bad luck. But Marcus found dozens of them, stretching back to the moment humanity first made contact with the Galactic Concord. They have been killing us, he said, his voice flat and hard. Slowly, carefully, one by one. They've been cutting down anyone who might help humanity rise. The princess sat across from him in a small room deep beneath the palace, her face pale in the blue light. I did not want to believe it, she said, but the evidence is there. My family has been waging a quiet war against your people for decades. Marcus looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. Why? He asked. If they knew we were related, if they knew the truth about Earth, why would they want to destroy us? The princess was silent for a long moment. Because you terrify them, she finally said. You were supposed to be a backup, a seed planted on a distant world in case all else failed. You were supposed to stay primitive and isolated until we needed you. She stood up and walked to the window that looked out on nothing but stone. But you did not stay primitive, she continued. You built cities and libraries and telescopes. You split the atom and walked on your moon and reached into space with nothing but your own hands and your own minds. You did in a few thousand years what took us hundreds of thousands. She turned back to look at him. When we finally reached Earth, we expected to find animals. Instead, we found a species that was nearly ready to join us among the stars. And the people in power realized that if humanity was allowed to grow unchecked, you would eclipse us within generations. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest like a tide. So they decided to hold us back, he said. To keep us small and weak and dependent. Yes, the princess said. The trade restrictions, the technology embargoes, the diplomatic barriers, all of it was designed to slow your progress. And when that was not enough, they started removing the humans who might change things. Marcus thought of all the brilliant minds his species had lost, all the breakthroughs that never happened, all the lives that were cut short by accidents and illnesses that were not accidents or illnesses at all. He thought of his grandmother, singing songs that had crossed 10,000 years of darkness, keeping alive a heritage that an empire wanted to bury. We have to expose them, he said. We have to tell everyone the truth. The princess shook her head slowly. It is not that simple, she said. My uncle the emperor controls the military, the media, the courts. If we go public without overwhelming proof, they will simply declare us traitors and have us executed. She walked back to him and sat down again, close enough that he could see the tiny stars swimming in her eyes. And there is something else, she said. Something I have not told you yet. Marcus waited. I have allies among the nobility, she said. Younger lords and ladies who have grown tired of the old ways. Reformists who believe the empire needs to change. I have been cultivating them for years. Waiting for the right moment, she took a deep breath. One of them warned me this morning that my uncle has been asking questions about my activities. He knows I have been spending time with you. He does not know why yet, but he is suspicious. Marcus felt the danger closing in around them like a net. How much time do we have? He asked. Days, she said. Maybe less. Once he decides to act, he will move quickly. Marcus stood up and began to pace, his mind racing through options and possibilities. We need to get the evidence off-world, he said. We need to put it somewhere they cannot reach. Somewhere that can broadcast it to the entire Concord if anything happens to us. The princess nodded. I know a way, she said. There is a secure channel that connects directly to the human frontier colonies. If we can reach the communication hub in the East Tower, we can transmit everything we have found. Marcus stopped pacing. The East Tower is heavily guarded, he said. I have memorized every patrol route in this palace. There is no way to reach it without being seen. The princess smiled, and for a moment she looked almost mischievous. There is one way, she said. The old servant passages that run through the walls. They were sealed centuries ago, but I know where the entrances are. My grandmother showed me when I was a child. Marcus felt hope kindle in his chest for the first time in weeks. Then we go tonight, he said. Before your uncle can make his move. The princess stood and put her hand on his arm. Marcus, she said, and her voice was soft and serious. If we do this, there is no going back. We will be traitors to the empire, fugitives, enemies of the throne. Marcus looked at her and thought of his grandmother singing in her kitchen. Thought of all the humans who had died to keep his species small. Thought of the children who would grow up believing they were lesser beings because an empire built on lies told them. So, my grandmother used to say that the truth is like water, he said. You can dam it and divert it and try to hold it back. But eventually, it will find a way through. He put his hand over hers. "We are the water," he said. "And tonight we find a way through." The princess squeezed his hand and nodded. And together they began to plan, but in the shadows of the palace. In rooms they could not see, and through channels they could not hear. The emperor was making plans of his own, and he had no intention of letting the water flow free. They came for Marcus at dawn. He was asleep in his small quarters when the door burst open and 6 Imperial guards flooded into the room. Their weapons raised, and their faces hidden behind silver masks. He did not resist. There was no point. They were too many and too fast, and he had learned long ago that sometimes survival meant knowing when not to fight. They dragged him through the golden corridors in chains, past servants who looked away and nobles who smiled with cold satisfaction, and threw him into a cell deep beneath the palace where no light reached and no sound escaped. He sat in the darkness and waited and tried not to think about what was happening to Alnder. The answer came 3 days later when a guard unlocked his cell and led him to a vast chamber where the emperor himself sat on a throne of crystal, and Shadow Emperor Valdric Velshan was ancient even by Volanthi standards. His silver skin faded to gray, and his glowing eyes dimmed by centuries of calculated cruelty. But his voice was still strong when he spoke. "Marcus Chun of Earth," he said, and the words echoed through the chamber like a death sentence. "You are charged with espionage against the Volanthi Empire, seduction of a member of the royal bloodline, and contamination of sacred heritage. How do you plead?" Marcus looked up at the emperor and felt no fear, only a cold, hard anger that had been building for 3 years. "Where is the princess?" he asked. The emperor smiled. "My niece has been confined to her chambers for her own protection," he said. "She has been declared mentally compromised by human influence. Her testimony is invalid, and her claims are the ravings of a damaged mind." Marcus felt his hands curl into fists. "She is not damaged," he said. "She's the only member of your family who has the courage to face the truth." The emperor leaned forward on his throne. "The truth," he repeated, and his voice was soft and dangerous. "You mean the fantasy you have been whispering in her ear. The absurd notion that humans and Volanthi share some ancient connection." He waved his hand dismissively. "There is no truth in that tale. Only the desperate dreams of a primitive species that cannot accept its place in the natural order." Marcus met his eyes without flinching. "We have the evidence," he said. "Genetic records, star charts, documents from your own archives. You can kill me, but you cannot kill the truth." The emperor laughed, and it was a cold, hollow sound. "Evidence can be destroyed," he said. "Witnesses can be silenced. History can be rewritten. That is what empires do. That is what we have always done." He stood up from his throne and walked down the steps until he was standing directly in front of Marcus. "You will be executed tomorrow at dawn," he said, "in the great plaza where all the empire can see. And your death will send a message to every human in the Concord about what happens to those who forget their place." He turned and walked away. "Take him back to his cell," he said over his shoulder, "and make sure he is presentable for the ceremony." The guards grabbed Marcus and dragged him toward the door. But just before they reached it, he heard a soft sound that made his heart leap, a melody, faint and distant, drifting through the walls like a ghost. Lullaby Alendra was alive, and she was singing, and somehow she was telling him to be ready. That night Marcus lay in his cell and listened to the sounds of the palace above him, the footsteps of guards and the hum of machines and the distant murmur of voices. He had memorized every patrol route during his years of service, had mapped every corridor and every entrance and every weakness in the palace security. And now he put that knowledge together with everything he knew about the old servant passages Alendra had described. There was a way out. There was always a way out. He just had to find it. At midnight, the door to his cell opened, but it was not a guard who stepped through. It was Alendra. dressed in simple dark clothes with her silver hair hidden under a hood and her glowing eyes bright with determination. "How did you get out?" Marcus whispered. "I have been pretending to be broken," she said as she unlocked his chains. Crying and raving and agreeing with everything they said, my uncle thinks I have accepted my fate. He reduced my guards to 2 and I dealt with them while they were sleeping. She handed him a bag containing supplies and a small device that looked like a communication unit. "We transmitted the evidence before they arrested you," she said. "A copy is already on its way to the human colonies. But we need to get there ourselves to make sure it reaches the right people." Marcus took the bag and felt hope flood through him. "Lead the way," he said. They moved through the palace like shadows, slipping through hidden passages and forgotten tunnels that wound behind the golden walls like veins behind skin. The old servant roots were cramped and dusty, but they were also invisible to the security systems that watched the main corridors. And Alindra navigated them with the confidence of someone who had played in them as a child. They reached the outer walls just as the first light of dawn began to touch the sky. And there waiting for them was a small transport ship piloted by one of Alindra's allies, a young lord named Talon who had risked everything to help them escape. "We need to hurry," he said as they climbed aboard. "The Emperor will discover you are missing soon, and then every ship in the system will be hunting for us." Marcus strapped himself into a seat and felt the ship lift off, rising up through the atmosphere and into the endless dark of space. Behind them the palace shrank to a speck of light and then vanished entirely. And ahead of them the stars stretched out like a road leading to an uncertain future. "How long until we reach the human colonies?" Marcus asked. 3 days if we are lucky," Talon said. "A week if we are not." Alindra sat down beside Marcus and took his hand. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not giving up, for believing that the truth matters." Marcus looked at her and thought about everything they had lost and everything they still might lose. "My grandmother used to say that the only thing stronger than a lie is the person who refuses to believe it," he said. He squeezed her hand. "We are going to tell the galaxy what your family has been hiding," he said. "And then we are going to let them decide what kind of future they want." Outside the ship, the stars burned cold and bright, and somewhere among them, a message was traveling faster than light, carrying a truth that had waited 10,000 years to be heard. The Emperor would send ships after them, would hunt them across every system in the Concord. But Marcus was not afraid. He had been a servant for 3 years, and now he was free, and he had no intention of ever bowing again. The princes led Marcus through corridors he had never seen before, down staircases that spiraled into darkness, past doors that opened only when she pressed her palm against hidden panels in the walls. She did not speak, and he did not ask questions. He simply followed and tried to memorize the path in case he needed to find his way back alone. They walked for what felt like hours, descending deeper and deeper into the palace, until the crystal walls gave way to stone and the golden light gave way to a pale blue glow that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Finally they reached a door that was different from all the others, massive and black and covered in symbols that made Marcus feel dizzy when he looked at them too long. "This is the Forbidden's archive," the princess said, and her voice echoed strangely in the empty corridor. "Only members of the royal bloodline may enter. The punishment for anyone else is death." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, but he did not step back. "Then why are you bringing me here?" he asked. She turned to look at him, and in the blue light her eyes looked like moons rising over a dark sea. "Because you sang a song that should not exist," she said. "Because you carry a piece of my people's history in your memory, and I need to know how that is possible." She pressed both palms against the door and spoke words in a language Marcus did not recognize. and the door swung open with a sound like thunder rolling across distant mountains. Inside was a vast chamber filled with shelves that stretched up into darkness. And on those shelves were objects Marcus could not identify. Crystals and scrolls and machines that hummed with quiet power. The princess walked between the shelves, like she knew exactly where she was going. And Marcus followed her until they reached a section in the far corner where the dust lay thick and undisturbed. "These are the oldest records," she said. "From the time of the founding, from before the empire existed. No one has touched them in centuries." She pulled a crystal from the shelf and held it in her palm, and light bloomed from within it, projecting images into the air. Between them star charts, Marcus realized. Maps of galaxies and solar systems and travel routes that spanned distances he could barely imagine. 10,000 years ago, my people were not here," the princess said, and her voice was soft and sad. "We lived somewhere else, somewhere far away. And something terrible happened." She waved her hand and the images changed, showing a planet wrapped in fire and smoke, a world dying in slow motion. "We called it the Dying," she said. "Our sun was failing, our world was burning, and we knew we had to leave or perish, so we built ships and scattered ourselves across the universe like seeds thrown into the wind." Marcus watched the images of ships launching into darkness. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, fleeing a world that could no longer hold them. "Most of the ships were lost," the princess continued. "They vanished into the void, and we never heard from them again. Only a handful survived and found new homes. And over time, we forgot where we came from." She pulled another crystal from the shelf, and this one showed something that made Marcus catch his breath: DNA sequences. Genetic codes, comparison charts that showed two strands side by side. "I had our scientists run tests years ago," she said. "In secret, because I was curious. Because I wanted to understand why humans seemed so familiar to me." She looked at him, and there were tears in her glowing eyes. "Your people and my people share nearly identical DNA," she said. "The differences are so small they could be explained by 10,000 years of separate evolution. You are not strangers to us, Marcus Chun. You are family." Marcus stared at the floating images, his mind struggling to accept what he was seeing. "That cannot be true," he said. "Humans evolved on Earth. We have fossils. We have records. We know our history." The princess shook her head slowly. "You know part of your history," she said, "but not all of it." She pulled one more crystal from the shelf, older than the others, cracked and faded with age. And when she activated it, the image it showed was barely visible, but Marcus could still make out the words. Ancient Volanthi script that the crystal helpfully translated into his language. "And so we seeded them upon the distant blue world, that some part of us might survive the dying. And we gave them our songs and our stories and our hope, and we prayed that they would remember." Marcus read the words 3 times before they finally sank in. "Earth," he whispered. "You are saying that Earth was a colony ship, that humans are descended from the Volanthi." The princess nodded. "I am saying that humans are Volanthi," she said. "The original Volanthi, unchanged and unmodified. Your ancestors carried our oldest songs and stories across the stars, and somehow they survived." Marcus thought of his grandmother, of her wrinkled hands and her warm smile and the lullaby she had sung to him every night. He thought of all the stories she had told him. Stories, she said, were older than memory. Stories about gods who fell from the sky and heroes who traveled between worlds. Stories he had always thought were just myths. "My grandmother knew," he said softly. She did not know what it meant, but she knew. She kept the songs alive. She passed them down. The princess reached out and took his hand, and her cool fingers wrapped around his like she was holding on to something precious. "Your people kept our heritage alive for 10,000 years, she said. "While we forgot who we were, while we built an empire on lies and called ourselves superior, Your grandmother sang our songs and told our stories and remembered. She squeezed his hand tighter. Do you understand what this means? She asked. The Volanthi Empire treats humans like servants, like animals, like lesser beings who should be grateful for our attention. But the truth is that you are our ancestors. You are our roots. You are everything we have spent 10,000 years pretending we did not need. Marcus looked at the faded crystal with its ancient words, and he felt something shifting inside him. Something that had been bent for 3 years finally beginning to straighten. The Empire will not want this truth to come out. He said. The princess laughed, but there was no joy in it. No, she said. They will not. And if they discover that we know, they will kill us both to keep it buried. She released his hand and turned away, looking up at the endless shelves of forgotten history. But I cannot unknow what I have learned, she said. And I cannot let my people continue to live a lie. The question is, what do we do now? Marcus thought about it for a long moment. Standing in the depths of an alien archive with the weight of 10,000 years pressing down on him, we find more proof, he said finally. We find evidence that cannot be denied, and then we decide who to trust with the truth. The princess nodded slowly, and when she looked at him again, there was something new in her eyes. Respect. You are not what I expected from a human, she said. Marcus smiled for the first time in 3 years. My grandmother would say that is because you were not paying attention, he said, and somewhere far above them, in the gleaming halls of power, the emperor who knew all their secrets was already beginning to move against them. New Ganymede was a small world on the edge of human space, far from the gleaming towers of Earth, and even farther from the crystal palaces of the Volanthi Empire. It was a colony built by people who wanted to be left alone. Miners and farmers and dreamers who had crossed the stars, looking for a place to call their own. It was also the last place Marcus had expected to make his stand. They arrived after 5 days of running. 5 days of jumping from system to system while Imperial ships hunted them through the dark. And when their battered transport finally touched down on New Ganymede's dusty surface, Marcus felt something he had almost forgotten: relief. But the relief did not last long. Within hours of their arrival, the colonial governor received a transmission from the Volanthi Empire, demanding the immediate extradition of Marcus, Chun, and the Princess Alindra Velshan, fugitives accused of treason and crimes against the throne. The penalty for refusal was war. The governor was a tired man named Hansen, who had spent his whole life trying to avoid exactly this kind of situation. And when he looked at Marcus and Alindra, his eyes were full of fear. I cannot protect you, he said. The human government on Earth has already agreed to the extradition. They say we cannot risk a conflict with the Empire over 2 people. Marcus felt the anger rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. We have evidence, he said. Evidence that will change everything. If we can just broadcast it to the Concord. Hansen shook his head. The Empire has already jammed our long-range communications, he said. Nothing we send will get through. Alindra stepped forward. There is another way, she said. The Concord maintains emergency broadcast stations in every sector for disaster warnings. They cannot be jammed because they operate on a frequency that overrides all others. She looked at Hansen with eyes that burned with desperate hope. If we can reach the station in this sector, we can send our message to every inhabited world in the galaxy at once. Hansen stared at her for a long moment. That station is on the outer moon, he said. It would take 6 hours to get there and back. The Imperial fleet will arrive in 4. Marcus put his hand on the governor's shoulder. Then we have 4 hours to change the galaxy, he said. They gathered everyone who would listen in the colony's central hall. Miners and farmers and children and elders. People who had never asked for anything except to be left in peace. Marcus stood before them and told them the truth. He told them about the Forbiddens, archive and the genetic records and the ancient documents that proved humanity and the Volanthi were the same people separated by 10,000 years of darkness. He told them about the quiet war the Empire had waged against humanity for decades. The scientists who died in accidents, and the ships that vanished without trace, and the diplomats who fell ill at convenient moments. He told them about his grandmother and her lullaby, and how a song that crossed the stars had survived because ordinary people refused to let it die. When he finished, there was silence in the hall. Then a woman stood up, old and weathered, with hands that had worked the soil of a dozen worlds. "I knew Sarah Webb," she said, and her voice was rough with emotion. "She was my teacher at the academy. She was brilliant. They told us she died in an accident, but I never believed it." Another person stood, a young man with burns on his arms from working the mining rigs. "My grandfather was on the colony ship that disappeared," he said. 10,000 people gone, and they never even looked for them. One by one they stood, sharing stories of loss and suspicion, of brilliant humans cut down, and promising projects canceled, and opportunities that vanished like smoke. By the end of it, the hall was full of people who had spent their lives wondering why humanity always seemed to stumble just when they were about to soar. Now they knew. "We cannot fight the Imperial fleet," Hansen said quietly. "We do not have the ships or the weapons." Marcus looked at him. "We do not need to fight them," he said. "We just need to delay them long enough to send the message." He turned to face the crowd. "I am not asking you to die for me," he said. "I am asking you to help me tell the truth. And once the truth is out there, it cannot be killed, no matter what happens to us." The old woman who had known Sarah Webb stepped forward. "My grandfather was a fisherman on Earth," she said. "He used to say that you cannot stop the tide. You can only choose whether to swim with it or drown." She looked around at her neighbors. "I say we swim." The vote was unanimous 3 hours later. Marcus and Elindra reached the broadcast station on the outer moon, while behind them the people of New Ganymede prepared the only defense they had. They did not have weapons, but they had mining ships and cargo haulers and transport vessels, hundreds of them, and they flew them into the path of the incoming Imperial fleet like a wall of defiant humanity. They could not win, but they could buy time, and they did. In the broadcast station, Elindra stood before the camera and spoke to the galaxy. She told them the story of the dying and the seed ships and the distant blue world where a piece of her people had been planted like a hope against the darkness. She told them how humanity had risen without help, had built telescopes and rockets and computers from nothing but curiosity and courage and a stubborn refusal to accept their limitations. She told them about the songs her grandmother had taught her and how a human soldier had sung those same songs because his grandmother had taught him too. "My people forgot who we were," she said, and her voice carried across 1,000,000 worlds. "We built an empire on the lie that we were better than everyone else, that we had earned our place at the top through merit and destiny. But the truth is, we were just survivors, no different from any other species fighting to find their place among the stars." She looked directly into the camera. "Humanity did not need us to survive," she said. "They did not need our technology or our guidance or our permission. They clawed their way out of the darkness on their own. They kept our oldest songs alive when we had forgotten them. They are not our servants or our children. They are our equals. They are our family." The message ended, and the station went silent outside the viewport. Marcus could see the flashes of light where the Imperial fleet was pushing through the civilian blockade, mining ships and cargo haulers spinning away into the void as the warships broke through. But it did not matter anymore. The message had been sent across the galaxy. Billions of beings watched Alindra's broadcast, and something shifted. Something that could not be shifted back on 100 worlds. Members of other species who had accepted the Volante's claims of superiority began to ask questions in the halls of power. Politicians who had gone along with the empire's demands began to reconsider their positions, and on Earth, in a small village where an old woman sat by her window watching the stars, a grandmother heard her lullaby sung back to her from across the universe and smiled. The Imperial fleet reached New Ganymede, but they did not find the war they expected. They found a planet full of people who would not bow, who stood in the open and looked up at the warships without fear, who had already sent their children to safety and made their peace with whatever came. Next, they found Marcus Chen and Alindra Velshan standing hand in hand in the central square, surrounded by miners and farmers and dreamers who had decided that some things were worth more than survival. The admiral in command of the fleet looked down at them and hesitated, because behind him, his communication officers were telling him that the broadcast had reached every corner of the Concord, that other species were demanding answers, that Volante citizens were marching in the streets of the capital, that the Emperor's coalition was falling apart. He could still destroy New Ganymede, but it would not matter. The truth was out, and the truth, it turned out, was stronger than any empire in the end. The fleet withdrew not because they had lost, but because winning no longer meant anything. Marcus and Alindra stood on a hill overlooking the colony as the warships disappeared into the stars, and she leaned her head against his shoulder. What happens now? She asked. Marcus thought about it for a moment. Now we rebuild, he said. Not the empire, something better. Something that does not need lies to hold it together. She looked up at him. Will you teach me the other songs your grandmother knew? Marcus smiled and took her hand. I will teach you all of them, he said. And there on the edge of human space, under stars that had watched his ancestors cross the void 10,000 years ago, Marcus Chen began to sing. The princess joined in, and across the galaxy, on 1,000,000 worlds, others began to learn the words. The song had survived the dying and the darkness and 10,000 years of forgetting. It would survive whatever came next, because that was what songs did. That was what humans did. They endured, and they remembered, and they sang, and they never, ever stopped rising.